This module is about our agreements and values. It feels like the first place to start.
Sheddings, agreements and values.
Yeah. So well-being, I had somebody ask me the other day about how we weave well-being into carpentry, and I thought about the context of, well-being and carpentry, and then because for me I was thinking, well, I think about the idea of weaving well-being into everything, and carpentry is the thing that we're doing here. We are here to play, but by the nature of playing with tools, it brings up stuff.
Yeah.
I think about this experience as adults where we like to get things right, and as kids where we don't stand up and walk the first time.
No.
We stand up and fall over, and we don't think, I'm so bad at walking, I should probably not bother learning how to walk. We just do it again and try and play and experiment. And
no one criticises you either.
They
don't
go,
say,
here, you
that's
can do
it.
it, come here.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what we're doing for people.
Yes.
And as strange as that may sound, I feel like I've been thinking about the idea of leadership and being a cheerleader for someone.
Yes.
Just really celebrating them.
Yes.
And their achievements.
Having a go.
Yeah.
Just having a go.
Yeah.
They don't have to win. They don't have to, Yeah.
I think about what you said about not wanting people to have to go through sort of what you went through. Yeah.
So it was directly from that I had the style of teaching I had. So it's sort of not quite answering your question, but it's like I started woodwork for women, not because I wanted to do something in well-being, but that well-being had to be a part of the woodwork.
Yeah.
It had to be, otherwise it wasn't going to work if it was just about teaching the skills, because as you say, stuff comes up. And when stuff comes up, there's tears or tantrums or whatever. And it was so nice to be able to meet that.
And I feel a lot of resonance with that. I think about the values that I say to people here. We have these values. We really have like lots and lots of values around well-being, but it's nice to start them off with like, here are 3 bite-sized pieces that we can focus on when we come into this space. The first is to celebrate your mistakes.
Yeah.
And to think about, I know from my experience, that feeling of anxiety or fear or stress is the feeling that, in retrospect, I now see that clouded my capacity to learn in a way that felt playful.
Yeah.
And when that stress is gone, I watch people learn so fast that it blows my mind. I think, wow, they're learning so fast. I also had this experience with mistakes where I realised that fixing mistakes is also an incredible skill and an incredibly important skill.
Yeah.
And also that sometimes mistakes are not mistakes, but I think they're mistakes. And it's actually an amazing design change that's trying to happen, but my logical brain doesn't allow the creativity of, it's going to change in this direction. Have you ever had that feeling?
I can't say I have, but it's definitely happened to my students. Definitely.
Yeah.
I've watched it before my eyes, and you're absolutely right. You describe it perfectly.
Yeah.
And that was what the resistance and the struggle was. And it was like, no, this is how it was meant to be. This is how it was meant to look.
The second value is own your tool. Did you ever have an experience where someone grabbed the tool off you to show you something on the tool?
When I was learning, yeah. It feels very powerless making.
I think about when we've been sort of shown how to do something, and the person who's showing us how to do something thinks that they're teaching us how to do something, and they're not.
No.
And so it gets me thinking about this concept of what is teaching and how do we teach. I know my process of teaching and learning how to teach has been through teaching.
Yes.
And then going, that doesn't work.
Yes.
That person's recoiling. They don't like listening to this.
Yes.
They're not. And then I'd find different things that I could do. So I know that idea of not taking the tool out of somebody's hands became so important.
Yes.
And I thought, well, what are the other ways that we can try and show people how to use the tool? There are so many different learning styles for people, and looking into a little bit of philosophy around that and how the brain works, and finding motions or noises. I spoke to someone the other day, and he said, I still think about when you're drilling in your high speed. Because when I say high speed, I always say high speed. I don't say high speed. I say high speed and slow screwing.
I'll borrow that. I love that.
High speed.
I love that. Yeah.
Push. So all of these motions, like the table saw is like a pool game.
Yeah.
And these things that we know already. To keep the tool in your own hands, and this connection that happens between the mind and the body. This is something that I think I really, really dropped into in your workshop. That was when something changed for me, where I thought, oh, this is all about feeling.
Yeah.
And you talked about the song of the saw. And
a gentleness, definitely a gentleness with the saw to cut. It's not it's a real gentleness, and keeping that saw in, in a rhythm. It's definitely that. You're absolutely right.
And then it becomes, for me, what happened was it became a practice of mindfulness. And I think my struggle has been slowness, mindfulness, getting out of my head, getting into my body. And also noticing if I'm stressed out, things can go a bit awry. And if I'm feeling good, then I'm focused and I feel like I'm in a flow state. And then it became about the process, not the outcome.
Yes.
And I feel often that I'm trying to bring students back to that point, because they often come in here because they want to build something.
Yes.
But in that first 10 minutes of the first workshop, where we have our check-in, they say, I just want the confidence to...
Yes. ...
And so it's that sort of confidence piece that I think we're trying to bring people back to. To touch on inclusivity, I can feel quite strongly about inclusivity. There are lots of labels. I feel quite strongly about removing labels, or if I choose a label by which I want to identify, great, but I won't label others.
Yes.
So I think about shedding in the context of, people say, what is shedding? What is shedding? And I chose a pretty ambiguous double entendre name, I think quite purposefully. And so I say, oh, it's like a men's shed or a women's shed, but it's for everyone. And people say, oh, that's great. And I remember when I was creating it, I thought, maybe I want to create a women's shed. And I also thought, I'd quite like to create a men's shed, but I'm not a man, so that's not going to work.
No,
and then I thought, oh, it's not a women's shed, it's not a men's shed, it's just a shed. And so it became, and I think I didn't realise how important that would become. I think about men coming into this space. Women come into this space because, well, they don't want to go to a men's shed.
Yes.
I was talking the other day to somebody about men's sheds and how they are inclusive to women. And they were saying, but, it's kind of in the title, really. It's a men's shed. And I thought about women coming to this space because they don't want to go to a men's shed. But then I also thought about the men that come to this space because they don't want to go to a men's shed. They want to be in a space that is
inclusive.
And there's that diversity.
Yes.
And then a few years ago, I think it was 4 years ago, I had a non-binary person sign up for a workshop, and their name was androgynous.
Yes.
So I couldn't tell if it was a male or female name.
Yes.
I didn't know that they're not non-binary. I just get a name and I say, great, that's your name. And then they come to the workshop and I said, I love that your name is androgynous because I didn't know if you're going to be a man or a woman. And they said, I'm non-binary. And I said, what's that? And they said, if you're going to run an inclusive workshop, you better know.
Yes.
And so I just thought, wow, we create all these different categories that are so important. Like when I've been to the men's shed, I've seen how important it is for those men to go to a space that is for men.
Yes.
And so it feels important to acknowledge that shedding isn't about reacting against any of those things. It's just trying to fill a need, a different need.
A different need.
Yeah. There was something you said about the women saying no. And it got me thinking about taking ownership and responsibility for our feelings.
Yes.
Which is the third value, actually. The first was the celebrate your mistakes. The second was own your tool.
Yeah.
Don't give your power away. Hold on to it. Don't let someone take it from you. Use your words. I'll hold on to this. And the connection between the mind and the body. And the third is this sort of idea that I used to speak about, this idea of what we feel is what we create. And checking in with our feelings first and noticing for myself, actually, on this particular day, my capacity is really low. So I'm not going to have these high expectations of myself. I'm just going to be gentle with myself. And on other days, I'm like, let's go. And I can really go for it. And thinking about taking ownership for our feelings. It reminds me of what I learned when I was doing some training in compassionate communication, which is also known as nonviolent communication, but I think that name was a little bit violent, so I changed compassionate communication, mental health first aid, and also more recently I've done a course in authentic relating. And the thing about those things is it is about communication.
It is.
It's not about feeling frustrated and then sort of bottling it up. And it's also not about feeling frustrated and letting it all out, but actually taking ownership and responsibility for our feelings. And I mean, the simplest thing that we do at the start of a workshop is just to have a check-in and just name it. If you feel like naming it, no obligation. So I really like that taking ownership and expressing your needs. Sometimes, and acknowledging that they are different for each person. I think about people who come into the workshop that might have experienced what they might call a trauma with tools. And so they're going to have a very different response to a particular tool than someone who's super cruisy and having a great time and has not had a bad experience with tools. And they still can get to the same point of, oh my God, this is really fun. I'm really safe. This feels good. But to carry them through that, and I think for them to take responsibility, I think it's just such a vulnerable thing to learn new skills and tools. There's something about power tools that can be really stimulating for people.
It's perfect. It's perfect. You go zoom. There's no warm up. It's just like raw power tool. And people bring a lot of ideas, even if they haven't had a bad experience themselves. Somebody's told them about a bad experience, or it's already in their head. So, or they've already seen cartoons with Donald Duck strapped to a table saw, and his eyes, and it's already there. So a lot of it's very rare to find someone who's pretty cruisy unless they've had a bit of experience. So it's a very fast starter. Is power tools,
but people have been using power tools probably much of their lives, like a smoothie machine. And I say to people, if you stick your fingers in the bottom of the smoothie machine, you'll probably chop your fingers off, and everybody laughs because it's ridiculous.
I like the way that we're always looking to change perception, whether it be in a workshop or whether it just be in life, to change somebody's perception around a story they've got going. And that's what you do at shedding. They come in with a story and you go, hey, look, you've already, how about looking at, and it's really refreshing to see people lighten the load and go, oh, I can do this. It's a power tool, but I'm going to be taught properly by a teacher.